So the month of August has completely gotten away from me, and there's only a few days left in it, so it is high time that we get to my August garden tour. Now in southern Ontario, August tends to bring some pretty wicked weather. We have a lot of crazy and beautiful thunderstorms, so we get some really interesting skies, some high winds, sometimes we get hail, we get a lot of sporadic weather. So one minute it's like beautiful and sunshine, and the next minute it's raining and pouring. We also get a lot of cicadas. Not sure if you can hear those there, but this year especially, we've had so many cicadas, and they have a very interesting life cycle with 17 years. So I'm guessing 17 years ago it was a really good season for them because we have an influx of them this year. But with that sporadic weather and with the heat and with the rain, we've also had a lot of really insane growth in the garden. But then there's other things that are a lot smaller than they were last year. So we're going to jump into it and cover the differences and nuances. So my favorite little blueberry barrel here. This has done so well, so proud and pleased with this little project. We haven't had any issues with birds. I think the proximity to the front door and the frequency of us picking them, because we are out here picking them every single day, has just prevented the birds from ever having an opportunity to come and steal, and the squirrels aren't quite ballsy enough to get this close to the house because of the dog. So this has worked out beautifully. What I'm thinking I might do over in the space closer to the door here, because the blueberries haven't filled in the whole barrel yet, is probably pop in a mum or something for some fall color moving forward, just to kind of brighten it up a little bit and give it a little something something. And what you may notice over here is some mulch. I noticed it, I think it was in June. All of my mulch, I've had cedar mulch put down before, and also straw. And all of it had just disappeared. I've been watching the birds do a lot of thievery, especially with the straw. They really seem to use it throughout this whole entire season, from early spring right up until recently, for nest building. At least that's what I assume they're doing with it. The starlings especially, some of the robins, they'd come over and they'd grab a beakful and fly off. And between that and the wind, and I guess just natural breaking down, my soil was completely exposed, and plants were drying out and they just weren't doing their best. And I have found time to be a really big struggle this month, hence why this is even so late in getting out. And I needed to just get something in to help with both weeding, watering, and then it also just makes it look so much prettier, so much more pulled together. I've been in the process of remulching all of the beds. So over in this area was where I noticed some of the craziest growth happening. So up until this point here, this was all of our previous growth, and this was all that this shrub was. And everything from here up has grown in the last month. It was just insane. Once the heat broke from July and we started getting rain again, this plant just exploded. This is my dwarf mock orange. This is not so dwarf anymore. And same thing with the purple leaf sand cherry. It's just a crazy amount of growth has been occurring. The silver mound artemisia has been doing the same thing. They've probably quadrupled in size, which is excellent. Some other surprises in this area, the bellflowers are still doing so incredibly well. I'm so pleased with the longevity of the blooms out of that, and it's really a plant that I want to have spread throughout the garden because of that reason. My hosta over here is finally blooming. And that plays off the bellflower really quite nicely. My black-eyed Susans are finally coming into play, and they're one of my favorite flowers. They always have been, and I'm really excited for that patch to grow in both height and spans as it moves forward. One thing in this space that I wasn't feeling, there wasn't anything wrong with it per se, but I just wasn't in love with it, was this little strip of dianthus along the front here. It gives some pretty good color, but it's just kind of, I wanted something different. And I've been observing my daughter and how she's been interacting with the space, and I've noticed that she's been really enjoying the different textures. So she's been walking over, especially to the artemisia, and petting it. She's really interested in the textures. So I ended up picking up some of this piglet fountain grass because one, I mean, it's just fun to play with, but you get these really fluffy little spires. They're little feathers, and I guess they call them flowers on the grasses here. And I figured I would replace that just to give some full texture in here, some all-season interest instead of having a period of bloom and then a period where it's not blooming, and just switch things up a little bit. And the reason I picked up those was because I went to find something a bit more drought tolerant. So I really enjoyed the other spurge that I have, and I wanted to pick up, what I really wanted was Joe Pye weed for the sake of butterflies. But instead, the store didn't have any, and I didn't want to drive all the way out to the native store in Claremont. So I just grabbed another spurge here, and it is going to be replacing my lilac, which is a lesson learned about nice plant, wrong place. I've mentioned in previous months about how the overhang here makes a bit of a drought zone, and it's a fairly large drought zone, but I planted that lilac in when it was still the existing foundation planting that was there when we moved in, and it is too close to the house, too close to the foundation, and I established it. I watered it for the first year, even second year, to get it some good roots, and it was doing great. And then this year I stopped doing that because I'm like, you're solid, you're a hardy plant. And especially with July and how dry and hot July was, it fried. And then I was just too busy. And then by the time I noticed it, it's shriveled, it's fried, it's looking really, really sad. So I'm going to pull it out. I'm gonna see if there's anything worth salvaging. I'm gonna stick it in a pot and just, baby it a little bit, see if it bounces back. If not, another loss for me. But lesson learned, I'm going to put something drought tolerant there, because now there is going to be a hole, and I do want something that's going to get fairly sizable. And this will get to be about 2 feet tall, 2 feet wide, so it's going to have a decent mass to it, and should stand up above the hosta without really competing with anything else. And then the butterflies, and it's also some later season interests, because my garden has a lot of spring, a lot of early summer, and then as we get later in the season, it starts to peter out. Even right now, the blooms and what I have, because they're all fairly new additions, the late summer to early fall interest in my space is a little lackluster. Give it another year or two and it's gonna be significantly better, but the plants are still very much babies, and they just need some time to come into maturity and fullness and to receive themselves and get some mass. So that is kind of this space. One of the new additions that we have now finally blooming are our dahlias. This one's starting to look a little bit sad, but they are finally coming into their own. And I'm hoping to get a bunch more. They are definitely not as happy in my good old North York clay soil as they are in the back in my pots, where they are a bit more babied. But they fill up the space here nicely. And then this space in behind me, which was where I had my Japanese maple that had passed for me, we finally have a fun little project that we're going to be putting in there. Grandma's building us something special for my little one for the garden space, and that it looks like is going to take over this space. So that will be coming in a future video. Okay, so somebody decided that they wanted to join in on this video. This is one of the main reasons why I have been struggling so much this month to get anything done. Having a newborn is fairly straightforward. All they do is sleep and eat. But once they start getting closer to that 4-month mark, they start getting opinions, and they have very strong opinions on who you are paying attention to and when, and it is around the clock. So in this area, I guess we should start over here with the rose. My climbing rose kind of just stalled with July. It was, I guess, just too hot, a little too stressful. So it really wasn't pumping out any blooms. It also wasn't growing. And like our other shrubs, it has put on exponential growth, and it is now starting to put out a bunch of new flower buds as well. So it definitely requires a really good prune to keep it back in and safe as you're walking through here, so that you don't get stabbed. One downside of having a rose on an arbor, as beautiful as it is, it can be a little dangerous. The clematis, one thing I want to do next year is add in some climbing annuals. I have some out in the front, I've got some out in the back, whether it's a morning glory that will reseed, so it's less maintenance for me, but I don't want to necessarily add in another late season clematis, but it would be really nice to still have some blooms instead of it just being green. I think that's something that I'm going to switch up and do differently for next year. In this area here, I think it was back in my May video, I had noticed about my alliums, but the alliums this year are a bit smaller than last year. Last year they were really huge, and they just seemed a lot smaller than they had in previous years. And now I have to say the same thing about my liatris. Last year my liatris, like the flower spikes on them were really large, really quite impressive. And this year they're like these dinky little, I kept hoping that they would keep growing. and they didn't. So because they also didn't grow, the way that the blooms work on them is they start at the top and the purple comes in and works its way down. So the longer your I guess spire is, the longer bloom time you get with them. So because they were so short, the blooms were over in way too soon, way sooner than they were last year. I have very few little flowers left on them, and that's quite disappointing. So I don't know if that's just because of moisture levels between this year and next. It's only my second year with them, so I'll have to see how they do next year to have a better understanding of what it is that they're liking, not liking, and why they're doing what they're doing. But the cone flowers are doing great. I cannot wait for the echinacea to come in here and really start to give it some height. And then all of the thyme has really been filling in. Actually, in my walkway over here, I've had to come in and keep trimming it back around the stone because it's loving this weather. It's just been thriving. Surprisingly, the hostas, they are so bulletproof. Like, it's no wonder that everybody has hostas in their yard, but they can survive anything. So I had split it at like the worst season to be splitting it, popped it in the ground. It's not looking anything fantastic. It's got a bit of sun scald, but it's surviving and it's doing really well. So it should still be around for next year, no problem. And my snowball viburnum is another shrub that is just putting on a huge amount of growth. They say the first year they sleep because they're establishing roots. The second year they creep, so you don't really notice a lot of growth. And the third year they leap. And for a bunch of mine, it's just their second year. With this guy, it is the third year, and a lot more growth this year than in previous years. In the back space here, I finally hauled out my kale. That thing is a beast, and I'm so glad it's gone. Didn't really get any of the seed pods off of it. I didn't really have intentions of keeping the seeds because I have a bunch still inside, but it was just so cool watching all the birds come and make use of it. They really just had such a wonderful buffet, and as much of an eyesore as it was, between the sunflowers out by the road and the kale, the birds had so much to be picking on that maybe that's another reason why they didn't go after my blueberries. So yes, we can finally walk through this space again without the kale having been here, which is so much nicer. That will also give this some more space to finally thrive. I noticed it was actually starting to work around the kale, so it was very much high time to get it out. Roses, these guys are powerhouses. They just bloom all season long. They get bigger and bigger. They're so colorful. In southern Ontario, at least, I've noticed that this time of year, people have all the same plants in their garden. You've got your hydrangeas, you've got your roses, you've got your Rose of Sharon. Black-eyed Susans are starting to have a bit more of a show, and then annuals. And you don't see a lot of variation to that. It's just, I guess, what is offered at nurseries, and that's just what people gravitate towards because that's what they're used to. But it also means that there's not a lot of native plants that are being planted out for pollinators. So with butterflies, everybody's starting to get onto the milkweed bandwagon in our area. But then once the caterpillars have done their thing and turned into a butterfly, milkweed doesn't help them anymore. Now they need other plants in order to get their pollen and their nectar from. And I'm noticing so many gardens are just, they're deserts. They don't offer anything of value to butterflies, or at least very little of value. So I'm really hoping that people start to see the positives of having more natives that are late season to help get these guys fueled up and ready for their long commute down south, beyond just getting them hatched and seeing that. So in August, I had mentioned at the beginning that we get a lot of storms and a lot of really sporadic weather, and we do start getting more moisture again, which is nice. But with that moisture also comes the opportunity for fungal diseases. So if you don't have very good airflow, we get a lot of humidity. August just becomes so muggy. And my hydrangea over here that still hadn't become anything, I was digging around looking at the mulch, and I noticed that I guess just water had sat, like clay soil doesn't drain very well. It holds on to a lot of things. We've got some mold going on in the mulch. So it looks like in this area over here, I have to do a bit of fluffing. The mulch is a little bit older now, which is good because it's going to break down and provide nutrients into the soil, but it also starts to compact. And when it compacts, then you don't get the same airflow, and you can have issues with fungal mold. So that might be why my hydrangea is really not doing well. Yes, it's getting the moisture, and the red bud is helping to shade it, so it is not in full sun all day long, but it's also still alive, still not thriving. And our last little zone over in this area, our climbing plants have finally started to make an appearance. So I'm guessing I was just an impatient gardener, because they are starting to spread, not to the fullness and intensity that I had hoped to see with them, but I'm also collecting seeds, so I can always give it another try again next year. The beans have started to put out some produce, but this is really like, what do they call them? Death strips. Or hell strips rather, up by the front road, and it has all the salt of winter, and it's just compacted soil, and it's really not anything that does very well. So there's very specific plantings you can put in these hell strip areas that will do a bit better. Once again, native plants tend to thrive a bit more. But over in this area, this is still doing okay. Our sunflowers have been popping up and being munched away. I haven't really gotten to enjoy any of them because the birds get to all of the seeds before I do. But this is our last monstrous one, and it's just about to open. So it looks like that might be our final one, because this one here in behind me is done. The birds have eaten it all. But the Wigelia is doing well, burning bush is doing well, lavender is doing well. I think my spring heath is still toast. And the other downside of filming out front is it's busy. It's the city, still noisy as ever. So let's head into the back.